everyone, welcome back to the channel. I hope you are doing well today. I wanted to talk about some of the most important distilleries in the whiskey world, some of the pioneers, the innovators, the distilleries that made whiskey what whiskey is. You know how this works by now. I'm going to pour myself a dram and let's talk about the most important whiskey distilleries that you should know. Let's go. These first two are going to be some of the pioneers of whiskey, and I want to start in Scotland with the Glenlivet. I mean, today it's one of the most famous names in Scotch whiskey, but in the 1800s it was the symbol of something much bigger, and that was the shift from illicit distilling to legal Scotch production. When George Smith founded the Glenlivet in 1824, he was one of the first to receive a licence under the new Excise Act. At the time, most whiskey was made illegally in the Highlands. Glenlivet style, which was sort of light and floral and approachable, kind of became the blueprint for Speyside whiskey. It kind of helped to define what Speyside whiskey to become. Even rivals wanted to borrow the name. For decades, people wanted to use Glenlivet in their names, which is why you sometimes see hyphenated names like Macallan Glenlivet on some really old bottles. Glenlivet is definitely a big part of the moment that Scotch became legit. Another distillery that is very much a pioneering distillery, but on the American side, is the Buffalo Trace Distillery. Now, they claim that they are the longest continually running distillery in the US, and that includes through Prohibition. Most distilleries closed down in the 1920s, but Buffalo Trace kept producing medicinal whiskey under government licence. But way beyond that survival, Buffalo Trace is definitely still a hub for innovation. They produce the modern Weller line, they distill the Van Winkle whiskies, they produced the first commercially available single barrel bourbon, which is Blanton's. They also pioneered things like warehouse experiments, like Warehouse X. All in all, they're definitely pioneers of American whiskey and bourbon in more ways than one. Okay, these next two distilleries are big players in the world of craft and innovation, and I'm gonna start with Springbank. Now, you can think what you like about Springbank, but you cannot deny that their craft and their craftsmanship is amazing. Now, if you didn't know, Springbank is located in Campbelltown, which was once called the whiskey capital of the world, but now there are very few distilleries remaining, and Springbank has become almost mythical. Can I say that? It's one of the last distilleries in Scotland to do almost everything by hand. So floor malting, direct firing stills, they bottle in-house. In a world of automation, Springbank is like a little time capsule. It definitely has a cult following, and some of that is for sure hype, but there is definitely elements of truth and good reasoning in that obsession as well, if that makes any sense. They genuinely do produce excellent whiskey. The other one for craft and innovation, I'm gonna say Nikka, but specifically Yoichi. This story began with Masataka Takatsuru, who in 1918 travelled from Japan to Scotland. He studied chemistry in Glasgow and then interned at some distilleries, and then took that knowledge back to Japan, did a few things there, but eventually he founded Nikka. Yoichi was built in 1934 on the northern island of Hokkaido, which was chosen because it felt very similar to Scotland. It had clean water, it had access to peat, it had a cool climate. Takatsuru even insisted on coal-fired pot stills just to make it as similar as possible. Nikka, but also Suntory for sure, laid the foundation for the global rise of Japanese whiskey. Without Takatsuru and Nikka, Japanese whiskey would definitely not be what it is as we know it. These next two are going to be modern world whiskey influences, and I want to start with Kavalan, of course, in Taiwan. I've just realised I haven't actually sipped this. I've probably been shaking it around everywhere, and I can already foresee the comments. Cheers anyway. Okay, back to Kavalan. Back in 2005, when Kavalan opened in Taiwan, world whiskey was nowhere near as much of a thing as it is nowadays. No one would have ever expected a distillery in a country with no whiskey tradition to ever kind of compete with, say, Scotch whiskey or whiskey from a country that was already very established in the global whiskey making world. The thing about Taiwan, along with some other countries, but in Taiwan the climate is very hot, which means that whiskey can mature at a much quicker rate. A 6-year-old Taiwanese whiskey can have the richness and complexity of a 15 to 18-year-old Scotch. When Kavalan Solist Vino Barrique won the best single malt at the World Whisky Awards in 2015, it was kind of a revolutionary moment because it showed the world that a world whisky, which was not made in Scotland, is capable of winning the world's best single malt. Suddenly, world whisky wasn't just something people were, curious by, it was something that was competing at the top level. And I think that's really lovely. Amrut is the next one in this category, and it's pretty similar. Amrut helped to rewrite the rules about Indian whiskey. Until the early 2000s, Indian whiskey was mainly technically more of a rum spirit. It was made from distilling molasses, but Amrut produced India's first ever single malt, and it did really well. Jim Murray's Whiskey Bible ranked Amrut Fusion as the 3rd best whiskey in the world in 2010. Like Kavalan, Amrut showed that great whiskey can come from somewhere outside of Scotland, Ireland, or the US. Today, India is the largest whiskey market in the world, and it's home to a lot of respected single malts. These final 2 distilleries, to be fair, I can't say that you guys didn't warn me that would happen. Anyway, these final 2 distilleries, I'm going to say, are shapers of taste and perception. I'm going to talk about Ardbeg because that's what I'm drinking. In the 1990s, heavily peated whiskey was quite niche. Glenmorangie bought the Ardbeg distillery in 1997, and they helped to make peat cool again. Definitely with the help of Lafroig and Lagavulin. They built this community of fanatics called the Ardbeg Committee, and they really helped to make peated whiskey a global phenomenon. Peated whiskey nowadays are definitely some of the most in-demand drams, and I would say that Ardbeg is a big part of that. I would recommend this, by the way, the Ugdal. Absolutely fantastic whiskey if you like something smoky, but only if you like something smoky. And the last one I'm going to talk about is Hibiki, Suntory Hibiki. I think Suntory really gave Japanese whiskey its luxurious artistry prestige name globally. It also really helped to shape the idea that blends can be just as prestigious as single malts. I also definitely think that Hibiki makes people think of Japanese whiskey as a luxury in its own right rather than just an imitation of Scotch. If you didn't know, Hibiki blends malt from Yamazaki and Hakushu with grain from Chita, often many components, and it makes its own Japanese blends. Bottles like Hibiki 17 and 21 really became symbols of Japanese luxury. They've won awards, they feature in movies like Lost in Translation. Their reputation for balance really helped to shape Japanese whiskey into a category that collectors and drinkers really value to this day. So those are just some of the distilleries that I think every whiskey lover should know. Definitely not an exhaustive list by any means. I could probably make 10 parts in this series, but let me know if you want to see more or not, or which distillery do you think I've missed out on the list? And I know, I've missed loads. If you are someone who likes whiskey, I'd really appreciate if you gave this video a like, and also subscribe to the channel so that you can always see when there's new content out. Anyway, that's all from me. I hope you have a good rest of your day and follow for more.